What if the smallest Canadian penny in your house is the one collectors would never ignore? One rare date, one hidden variety, or one unusual detail can turn an ordinary 1-cent coin into a real collector find. Check your jars, boxes, and piggy banks right now, and subscribe for more rare Canadian coin discoveries before you miss the next hidden surprise. Let's get started. A 1953 Canadian 1-cent coin is the kind of tiny copper piece that most people would ignore in a jar, yet for collectors it can feel like the beginning of a mystery. It carries the classic maple leaves reverse, the portrait of a young Queen Elizabeth II, and the Latin inscription Dei Gratia Regina, giving it an instantly historic presence. The moment you hold it, it does not feel like ordinary pocket change anymore. It feels like a coin from a transition year, a coin tied to a new monarch, a new portrait, and one of the most talked about early modern Canadian coin stories. That is exactly why a 1953 Canadian cent grabs attention so fast in videos. It looks simple, but behind that simple design is a collector world full of varieties, details, and value surprises. What makes 1953 special is that it was the first year Canadian circulation coins featured Queen Elizabeth II after the end of King George VI's era. First-year portrait coins always attract collector interest because they mark the beginning of a new chapter in national history. On top of that, 1953 became famous because the portrait and legend combinations created important variety differences that serious collectors still watch closely. This gives the coin a built-in suspense factor. To an everyday person, it is just an old Canadian cent. To someone who knows the series, it is a date that demands a closer look, because one small detail can completely change how desirable the coin becomes. The maple leaves reverse is one of the reasons this coin connects so strongly with audiences. Canadian cents already have a warm, familiar beauty, but the 1953 design feels especially symbolic. Two maple leaves joined on a stem, 1 cent, and Canada create a reverse that is clean, balanced, and unmistakably national. It is not flashy, but it is elegant. That quiet elegance matters in a script because it lets the coin feel timeless. It looks like the kind of coin a grandparent might have saved, the kind of coin found in an old tin, a sewing box, or the bottom of a forgotten piggy bank. That emotional familiarity makes viewers feel like they might actually have one, and that feeling is what drives engagement. Now comes the real collector hook. The 1953 Canadian cent is famous for varieties, especially the differences connected to the obverse legend and portrait style. Early 1953 coins are associated with the well-known no-shoulder fold type, while later pieces show the shoulder fold design adjustment. Even more importantly, collectors pay close attention to legend differences like the positioning and style around Dei Gratia Regina. These are not tiny, useless academic details. They are the exact kinds of variety markers that can turn one ordinary-looking cent into a much stronger collector coin than another cent with the same date. This is why the 1953 cent is such a strong treasure hunt coin. It teaches viewers that value often hides in design differences they never knew existed. Condition is another major part of the story, and with older copper coins it matters enormously. A worn 1953 cent can still be collectible because of the date and variety interest, but a sharply preserved example with strong detail, smoother surfaces, and attractive original color can stand in a completely different category. Canadian copper cents often tone beautifully over time, moving from bright red to red-brown to deep brown. Collectors care about that originality. A coin with natural color and clean, undisturbed surfaces is usually more respected than a coin that has been polished or cleaned. That is one of the best lessons to build into the script. Old copper does not need to shine unnaturally to be important. In fact, natural age can be part of its charm and part of its value. This is also where a serious video becomes stronger than hype. Not every 1953 Canadian cent is a fortune, and not every strange-looking example is rare. Some coins are simply worn, damaged, or cleaned, and cleaning can destroy collector appeal very quickly. Older cents often show scratches, spots, corrosion, or environmental damage from decades of storage, and those issues usually push value down instead of up. But a coin with a true variety, a stronger strike, and solid preservation becomes much more interesting. So the message that keeps your content trustworthy is simple. Do not judge the coin by age alone. Judge it by date, variety, surfaces, and how honestly it survived. Another reason the 1953 Canadian cent performs so well in content is because it sits at the crossroads of monarchy, design change, and collector curiosity. Viewers are not just hearing about an old penny. They are hearing about the first Elizabeth-era Canadian cent, one that launched with visible design differences and became a real hunt for specialists. That makes the coin feel alive in a way many old cents do not. It becomes more than a denomination. It becomes a piece of transition history. And when a coin combines history with visible variety potential, it stops being just collectible and starts becoming the kind of object people want to search for immediately. The strongest ending for a 1953 Canadian 1-cent story is honest, deep, and exciting at the same time. Most are not millionaire coins, but the right variety in the right condition can be a serious collector find. That is why these cents still matter. They prove that the smallest coin in the drawer can still carry the biggest surprise if the details line up. So if you have Canadian cents tucked away anywhere, do not rush past the 1953 date. Look at the portrait, study the legend, respect the surfaces, and never clean the suspicious ones. Because in coin collecting, a tiny copper cent can become unforgettable the moment someone finally notices what makes it different. Thanks for watching, and don't skip video because next coin change your life, and don't forget that subscribe to my channel. Next up, a 1991 Canadian 1-cent coin is the kind of piece that looks too modern to matter, and that is exactly why it can become such a powerful collector story. Most people see a small brown cent with the familiar maple leaves and the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II and assume it belongs in the category of ordinary loose change. But sometimes the most interesting coins are not the oldest looking ones. They are the ones hiding in plain sight, the ones people stopped respecting because they felt common. The 1991 Canadian cent is a perfect example of that tension, because behind its simple appearance is a year that collectors know can matter much more than casual viewers expect. The first thing that makes 1991 different is that it belongs to a late-era run of Canadian 1-cent coins, a period when the cent was still everywhere in daily life, but already moving toward the end of its long circulation story. That alone gives it a strange identity. It feels close to modern, yet it now belongs to a vanished denomination that Canada no longer uses in circulation. When viewers realize that, the coin gains an emotional twist. It is not just a penny anymore. It becomes a survivor of a discontinued everyday object. And that kind of last generation of normal use energy makes coins much more engaging on camera. The maple leaves reverse keeps the coin visually classic, and that is part of why so many people overlook its potential. The design feels familiar and calm, 2 maple leaves, Canada, and 1 cent arranged in a style that looks almost timeless. It is one of those reverses people stop seeing because they have seen it too many times. But in collecting, familiar designs can still hide uncommon years, lower surviving quantities in high grade, and specific market demand that most people never hear about. That is the perfect storytelling angle, because it takes the most familiar coin image possible and reveals that familiarity is exactly what made people ignore it for too long. Now here is the real collector hook. The 1991 Canadian cent is famous because of its mintage story. This date has long attracted attention because it was produced in relatively low numbers compared with many surrounding years, which immediately gives it extra weight in the series. The coin does not need to be from the 19th century to matter. It only needs to sit in the right place in the mintage timeline, and 1991 does. That makes it one of those dates that teaches viewers an important lesson very quickly. Rarity does not always look old, dramatic, or ancient. Sometimes it hides inside a coin people assumed was too ordinary to matter. The portrait side matters too, because the Elizabeth II obverse gives the coin an instantly recognizable royal identity, with the legend including DG Regina. That side of the coin can reveal both wear and overall quality much faster than casual viewers realize. The Queen's profile, the lettering, and the surrounding fields all help determine whether the coin is just a used survivor or a sharply preserved example. A heavily circulated 1991 cent can still be interesting because of the date, but a cleaner piece with stronger detail and original surfaces becomes much more appealing. That is where the real difference starts to show between a coin kept by accident and a coin worth keeping on purpose. Condition becomes especially important on a late-date copper cent because so many examples were handled carelessly. Pocket change, jars, drawers, and humidity all leave their mark. Collectors care a great deal about original surfaces, natural color, and the absence of harsh cleaning. A coin can move from attractive red-brown to deep brown over time and still remain desirable if that toning is honest and stable. What hurts the coin is artificial brightness, polishing, or damage that breaks the surface. That is why the best advice is always the same: never clean it. A 1991 cent with natural surfaces tells the truth about itself, and in collecting, truth is valuable. Another reason this date performs well in a video is that it carries the excitement of the modern sleeper coin. Those are the coins people never think to search for until someone tells them there's a reason to care. A 1991 Canadian cent is exactly that kind of sleeper. It's small, humble, and usually ignored, until the viewer learns it has a recognized place in the series. The second that happens, every old piggy bank and coin jar suddenly feels different. People start searching not just for beauty, but for date significance. That shift in the viewer's mind is what creates real engagement, because now they are not just watching the coin story, they are entering it. The strongest ending for a 1991 Canadian cent is simple and powerful. Most examples are not life-changing treasures, but this is one of those dates that proves even a late modern cent can carry real collector importance. The coin becomes valuable not because it is dramatic, but because it is quietly different in the right way. So if you find a 1991 Canadian penny, do not rush past it. Check the date carefully, study the condition, respect the surfaces, and keep it safe if it looks strong. Because in the world of coins, the biggest surprises often come from the pieces people thought were too ordinary to save. Next up, 1993 Canadian 1 cent coin is the kind of coin people pass over in seconds, and that is exactly why it can become such a compelling story. It does not have the dramatic age of a Victorian cent or the instant reputation of a famous key date, but it carries something just as powerful for modern viewers: surprise. A small brown coin with maple leaves and Queen Elizabeth II does not look like hidden opportunity. It looks like loose change, the kind of thing buried in old boxes, forgotten at the bottom of drawers, or sitting quietly in a jar that nobody has opened in years. And that is what makes it such a strong subject. The best collector discoveries often begin with coins nobody respected enough to look at twice. What makes the 1993 Canadian cent interesting is not one giant headline detail, but a combination of timing, familiarity, and collector behavior. It belongs to the late period of the Canadian cent, when the coin was still a common part of daily life, but already moving toward the final chapters of its circulation story. That gives it a different kind of energy than much older cents. It feels recent enough that people believe they might still have one, but old enough to trigger that question every coin hunter loves. Did I spend something worth saving without ever realizing it? That feeling alone creates strong engagement because it transforms the coin from background noise into a possible missed opportunity. The reverse is one of the reasons the coin works so well visually. 2 maple leaves on a single stem, the word Canada, and the denomination 1 cent create a design that feels deeply national, familiar, and clean. It is simple without being boring, and because the design repeated across many years, people stop noticing it. That is where the collector tension begins. Familiar designs often hide the best sleeper dates, because the audience assumes every coin with that reverse is equally common. The moment you tell them otherwise, they go from passive watching to active searching. Now every maple leaf cent in the house becomes a clue. On the obverse, Queen Elizabeth II appears with the DG Regina legend, and that side tells a condition story very quickly. The portrait, lettering, and surrounding fields show whether the coin has been heavily circulated, roughly stored, or surprisingly well preserved. This is important because later-date Canadian cents often survived in huge quantities, but not always in attractive condition. A coin with original surfaces, stable color, and stronger detail can already stand apart from a heavily worn or damaged example. That is one of the strongest lessons in coin collecting. Not all surviving examples of the same date are equal, and collectors pay for the ones that survived with more quality and more honesty. Another reason the 1993 cent is interesting is because it lives in the shadow of more talked-about dates, and that actually helps it in content. Coins with giant reputations often overshadow the quieter dates that collectors still watch. That makes 1993 a more subtle kind of search target. It is not the date every beginner is already chasing, which means viewers feel like they are learning something a little more insider, a little more hidden. Those are often the best performing coin stories because they do not feel recycled. They feel like you are opening a side door into the hobby and showing the audience something they never thought to ask about. Condition and color matter more with copper-based cents than many people realize. A 1993 cent can appear red, red-brown, or brown depending on how it was stored and handled. Collectors often prefer original, undisturbed surfaces over harshly polished shine because cleaning can leave unnatural brightness and hairlines that damage value. This gives your script a strong practical edge. The viewer learns that old or modern copper should not be judged by brightness alone. Some of the most appealing examples are those that look natural and balanced, not flashy. That reversal surprises beginners and makes them start looking at their coins more carefully. This date also works well in a video because it belongs to a denomination that no longer circulates in Canada. That fact changes the emotional tone immediately. The cent is gone from everyday use, which means every surviving 1993 piece has become part of a finished story. People are no longer asking whether they might get one in change tomorrow. They are asking whether the ones they already have are worth keeping. That creates a very different kind of urgency. It turns ordinary saved coins into the last witnesses of a denomination people once handled every day and now rarely see except in collections, jars, or memory. What makes a 1993 cent stronger in the market is usually not wild hype, but a combination of date interest, preserved quality, and the possibility of standout examples that survived unusually well. Late-date cents were often treated carelessly because nobody expected them to matter. That gives nicer survivors an edge. A coin with cleaner fields, better color, fewer marks, and sharper detail can feel far more important than the average piece. That is why the date matters as part of a search, not just as a standalone miracle. It invites viewers to look at quality, not just age, and quality is where real collecting begins. The smartest approach is always to separate emotion from evidence. Yes, the coin is old enough to feel interesting and familiar enough to make the hunt exciting. But real value comes from what the coin actually shows. Original surfaces, stronger preservation, and any true standout traits that separate it from the rest. If the coin is scratched, corroded, bent, or cleaned, the market often becomes less interested. If it is naturally preserved and attractive, that is where collector eyes start to sharpen. This honesty gives the story more power because it respects the viewer while still feeding the thrill of discovery. That is why a 1993 Canadian 1-cent coin can still be such a fascinating collector piece. It proves that a coin does not need dramatic age or internet myths to deserve attention. Sometimes all it needs is the right combination of timing, condition, and overlooked significance. So if you find a 1993 maple leaf cent in an old jar or tucked away in a forgotten box, don't rush past it. Check the date, study the surfaces, and respect the fact that ordinary-looking coins often become the most interesting only after everyone else stopped paying attention. In coin collecting, the quiet coins can still tell loud stories. These Canadian 1-cent coins may look simple, but the right date, condition, and hidden detail can turn an ordinary penny into a collector's discovery. Before you ignore or spend them, Check every old Canadian cent carefully, because the smallest coin in the jar can sometimes hold the biggest surprise. Thanks for watching, and don't forget that subscribe to my channel.